Hey, everybody. So today is a little different. If you follow LawDroid Manifesto, you may have heard some of our podcasts with some amazing legal innovators. In fact, my guest today, Jordan Furlong, has been a guest on my show. This is a little different. This is a new concept that I thought was really necessary. I'm calling it Unfiltered Conversations, and it's exactly that. It's about having real, authentic conversations with guests about topics that might be somewhat controversial, but that need to be talked about, especially right now. And so that's the concept. Today, the topic is the rule of law in a world gone mad, which I don't think is really over the top. But with that, and just by way of introduction, I'm Tom Martin. I'm CEO and founder of LawDroid. I'm also a lawyer and very happy to have you as an audience. And so let's get started. Let me introduce Jordan Furlong, who is a legal analyst and forecaster. He's with Law 21, and he is going to come up right now. Hey, Jordan.
How you doing today, Tom?
I'm doing pretty well. I mentioned before we started that it's freaky how we're like superimposed over our heads.
This is weird. It's like a double ice cream cone. It's very distracting, but that's okay. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, Jordan, like the idea for this, it actually came about because you sparked it. Like the articles that you've been writing about these subjects, high quality, amazing stuff. The funny thing is, it's a little ironic in the sense that you've always impressed me as very Canadian, very reserved, very polite, very analytical and thoughtful. But at the same time, like in the writing on these subjects that we'll be talking about, and there's a few of them, you've gotten right down in the nitty gritty. And I wholeheartedly agree with you that this is not a time where we could play it close to the vest or reserves. That's why I really wanted to talk with you about this stuff.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tom. And I think it's probably true, and not just for me. The sense I get is that given the urgency and given the seriousness of everything that's going on around us, then I think it's not that nuance isn't important, it still is, but I don't think it does us any good to be hinting or implying or saying this could be serious. No, I think if we see there are bad things happening, it's incumbent upon us to say there are bad things happening and we need to do something about it. So, yeah.
So about those bad things happening in the news, it comes up about, and thank you to everyone on LinkedIn who's posting about these things. But one of them that comes to mind is like an immigration attorney that's an American citizen potentially getting deported, which sounds crazy, and a number of other things. Like one that I'd like to talk with you about because it pertains to both of us. You're Canadian. I am now a naturalized Canadian, but originally born and raised in Los Angeles, California, so an American. And I think one thing that kind of comes up for both of us is tariffs and this like beating of the drum about 51st state and about the governor of the state of Canada and all that. And I just wanted to hear some of your thoughts about that.
Yeah. And it's funny, Tom, because even like that preliminary point you mentioned about the American attorney who's facing deportation, and I was having this conversation with someone to say, that's not even the right term. Right? You can't deport someone from their own country. The whole point of deportation is you are a citizen that belongs to another country. We're going to send you back to that country. So you can't deport someone, right? You can kidnap them. You can put them in an offshore gulag for certain, and we've certainly seen hundreds of examples of that. But it just goes to show the underlying irrationality and unlawfulness of what we're dealing with. But the tariffs part, this is one of those things where, yes, from the legal profession's point of view, whether you're a lawyer who does work of any kind of cross borders or not, sure, there are any number of implications and things to have to deal with. But when I talk about tariffs, I try to break it down into two, for our purposes, kind of two categories. The first is tariffs in the broadest sense, the whole day of liberation nonsense globally. And this is a term I'll return to frequently, the irrationality of the whole thing, because it's so difficult to understand what is it that is trying to be accomplished here. And I think it helps to try to make it's not that you can make sense out of what's happening, but you can try to understand the perspective of the people who are making the irrational choices and decisions. So, for instance, take someone like Trump. who for 40 years now has believed in tariffs as a cure-all for any economic issue and as a way to achieve, number one, the end of income tax, but number two, sense of that other people are taking advantage of me, right? Which is what inside that broken brain of his is the way he kind of looks at the world. So the tariffs themselves, the major implication of them on a global scale, of course, is very significant. You cannot put tariffs on $1.4 trillion worth of goods. It's very hard to get our heads around a concept like trillion, but that's what we're dealing with, and not cause havoc internationally. And we've seen some of the really fundamental like framework of the economic system consequences of that when we saw the flight from treasury bills and
Yeah.
the fact that they were being sold. And it turns out probably not even necessarily by China, which is everybody kind of says there's this belief that China holds the most T-bills of any other country. That's actually not true by a significant margin. The largest holder of American debt is Japan. And it was suggested that that's where some of these sales are coming from. But that kind of pulls out the underpinnings of the American dollar as global currency, of the
Right.
American economy, of course, issues. So we could talk about those aspects of it at length. The bottom line from the global point of view is that it's chaos, it's uncertainty, it's volatility that doesn't seem to serve any particular purpose, which is the terrifying part. Okay.
Yeah.
With regard to the Canadian side, though, it's actually really interesting to me. It's infuriating, but it's also particularly interesting because if again, take this from the point of view of Donald Trump, if you can. If what you're trying to do is actually reduce Canada to a state of such groveling vulnerability that it begs you to become the 51st state, you could probably do that with a concentrated, concerted effort over the course of a number of years. You could probably pull that off. If he really wanted to bring the full scope of American economic power to bear to crush our economy, yeah, I think he probably could. Whether that would get us to join their country willingly, I seriously doubt it, but that's something you could probably achieve if you wanted to. The trouble, of course, is two things. Number one, he decides also to pick a fight with everybody else at the same time. But number two, he starts on with all this 51st state stuff and Governor Trudeau stuff and so forth, right? And as a result, he turns this into something which is for him, oh, this would be nice if I could pull this off. And for us, it is existential, right? And this is something the United States does from time to time. It starts wars with other entities that are wars of choice for the United States and are life and death struggles for other entities. And those are wars that the United States consistently loses. And it will certainly lose this one. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that Canada is going to come out of this bruised, no question, bloodied. We are going to have a recession. It is going to last quite some time. But I think it's going to do us, in the end, a fair bit of good because it is going to unify us as a country. It is going to force us to make some significant productivity upgrades, which were long overdue, and it will kick us out of our complacency, which we fell into for a number of years, knowing that we've got this massive trading partner, we've got the protection of this huge military big brother. As someone said, we've been like coming along, knocking on the American door for years, saying, "Hey, can we borrow your lawnmower?" We're done with it. And you know what? Probably a good thing in the long run. Anyway, that's a problem, right? Any one issue like tariffs just rolls out into any number of other.
Yeah. Why not get started there? Like some thoughts that I have are that questioning that you're mentioning, like the questioning that's unnecessarily put into the heads of pretty much all of American allies at this point.
Yeah.
It's just this thing that's unraveling a structure that was intentionally put into place over decades and decades. The Marshall Plan, after that, the incorporation of the EU versus a financial cooperative, and then more of a political thing. Like, I think there's a lot of forgetting that I've noticed in terms of the why we've done things. There's a forgetting of the why. And the forgetting is that the whole point of interlocking us into this global relationship, this web of cooperation, has been to avoid conflict. The whole point is, like, when people start thinking, or nations start thinking in their head about readjusting things, not relying on others, putting themselves first, where everyone is putting themselves first, that's a situation where that leads to conflict. Because if you're completely self-reliant, then you start viewing things as a zero-sum game. And anyways, going to the more particular about here in Canada, moved here 12 years ago, live in Vancouver. I love Canada. It's a wonderful place to live, as was Long Beach, California, where we were living before then. You drive, like when you drive down to the Peace Arch to cross over the border here in Vancouver, which I've seen like a lot less traffic going south, there's a statue, like there's a monument that talks about us as brethren, because we are both born of the same tradition, the United States and Canada. And so like, I know that when we had talked before, like you had mentioned, that's like a sense of betrayal.
Yeah.
And that is something that administration changes, if it does, that won't cure that.
No, I don't think it will. And it is interesting, isn't it? Because there aren't that many countries in the world that about which you could make that kind of declaration or make that sort of descriptive statement and have it be reasonably true. And especially two countries that share a border this long. So it has been a very unique relationship. But it's also maybe been a bit of a reminder of, and I think it was Benjamin Disraeli who once said, nations don't have permanent friends, they only have permanent interests. And I suspect that is probably something that we're seeing right now, because the interests of the United States, from the perspective of the government that's running it, has shifted in ways that are not aligned with the interests of other countries, including, if not primarily, Canada. So from a realpolitik point of view, yeah, we are absolutely entering into a new era. So there's two quick things about that. One is the sense of betrayal that you mentioned has significant political ramifications, because as anybody who's in or around Canada, around Canadians knows, we are pissed over this. We are deeply upset, angry, hurt, frightened, insulted, offended, you name it, right? It's this huge ball of really not happy. And that's really unusual for this country, because we can be very provincial and at each other a fair bit. So that sense of betrayal really is felt widely among a lot of Canadians. And I think it probably ought to be, should be, hopefully is, a harbinger of a real change in how we look at ourselves as a country. I said to someone the other day, not to be overly harsh about it, but I said, you know what? We're probably overdue for growing up a little as a country and taking more responsibility for ourselves and not just breezing through because we happen to be in a sunny spot on the beach. So that sense of betrayal is a significant one, and it's an important one in terms of what political changes it will bring about. But when you look at it in terms of the economic impacts, it's also a question of being realistic as well. There's I forget the name of it. There's the rule in economics that basically says the costs of doing trade are inversely proportional to the distance away from your trading partner, something like that. And so the United States is an obvious and almost irresistible market for our goods. So it's all well and good to say, oh, we'll start trading with Europe, we'll start trading with Asia. Okay, but the gravitational pull of this market is extraordinary. So I think for Canada, the impetus is going to be to do things, for instance, yes, diversify our markets to a certain extent, but also upgrade our offerings. There is to much too great an extent. We have all these great resources. We have all this amazing, we have oil and lumber and water and stuff. And we basically just bring it to the border and dump it there and say, you guys take it from here and refine it and turn it into higher quality, higher value products, et cetera, et cetera. We got to start doing some more of that ourselves. We have to build our energy infrastructure much greater than we have been. And something I think we've been overdue and thinking about is how do we diversify our trade and services, right? Like you and I fall into this category. I do a lot of the work I do is with in the United States or in other countries, and I'm essentially involved in cross-border trade and services. And I suspect that is a market. And by the way, this applies to lawyers generally. There is a market there to build out more, to think how, thanks to the fact we have Zoom, thanks to the fact we have the internet and so forth, you can expand your markets far beyond the places that you used to be before if you're in the business of providing advice or insight or guidance or coaching or any of these kinds of things. That I think is something that we will see more of as a result of all this tariff madness in the coming years.
Let's move on to another topic, but this at the same time, it's all part of the same ball of wax here, because taking it back to the rule of law, right? Rule of law, as opposed to the rule of a king or
Hmm.
the rule
Yeah.
of any particular personality.
Yeah. Might makes right. Yeah.
Yeah, power versus principle. The reason why, and again, forgetting the why,
Mm.
the reason why rule of law has it's been such a boon to our economy. It's one of the reasons. When I say we, I'm
Mhm.
thinking the United States because of having grown up there. It wasn't typical. It provided a safe haven
Mhm.
essentially for people around the world to be able to invest money, to feel comfortable investing money.
Mhm.
And why? The reason why is because you invest the money and you don't have to worry about somebody yanking that company and taking it over, nationalizing it or taking
Yeah.
whatever instability there is in the economy, wiping out this investment that you have. And so it's an important thing, which, as you pointed out, now starting to trickle down to the bond market and people's confidence. And so there's a reason why we have this, besides just being nice to each other and
Mhm.
abiding by and
Yeah.
abiding by rules that mutually benefit us. There's good reason for it. And so, okay. So then the next thing is, which is really strange to me, like within universities, freedom of expression, and they're
Mhm.
being attacked for exercising constitutional rights that they have of assembly, of freedom of expression through this kind of alternate way of saying maybe it's a troubling activism on
Mhm.
campus, maybe going beyond what, and just trying to find an alternate route to attack it.
Mhm.
But it is the government doing this, and that's the whole reason why we have these protections in the US. What are your thoughts about?
Yeah. So there's the rule of law piece and there's the freedom of expression piece, and they are related to on this. Obviously, the benefits from the rule of law to most of recent history and most of the rest of the world are so incredibly self-evident, not just in terms of, yes, business for sure, because business likes certainty and detests volatility. But the rule of law fundamentally is about the rules apply to everybody equally and fairly. And because when you talk to the average person, you can ask a philosopher, right, or a legal scholar about rule of law, and they will tell you it's so great. Oh, it's this, and it's all very interesting and so forth. You ask your average person, and they say nobody gets to get away with something just because they're richer or more powerful than I am. That is a gut level sense of what the rule of law means fundamentally. And I think it's that gut level we have to work at and operate at to let people, because when we say the rule of law to your average person, they say, I don't know if I know that. But if you talk about corruption, if you talk about hypocrisy, if you talk about someone got away with this because they had enough money or they're a billionaire or whatever, then that starts making more of an impact. So I think when we talk about rule of law, it's important to yes, to remember the highfalutin stuff, but also to work with that at a very visceral level, because that's where you get people involved. And that kind of leads me to the second point. Yeah, the attack on Colombia, which was extremely successful from the Trump administration's point of view, because Colombia more or less caved to everything that they asked them for and said, okay, great. And then, as they tend to do, they overplayed their hand. They asked for more for Colombia. Then they sent demands to Harvard, which were just almost literally impossible to follow. And Harvard and all the other universities came to the same conclusion. It doesn't, we can't please them. We can't satisfy them. They will not be satisfied until we're gone. And this is something that until you've been under attack as an ethnic group, as a class, as a nationality, until you have been under sustained attack for a while, it takes a little while before you finally recognize, no, they don't want money from us. They don't want land from us. They want us to cease to exist. This is what's going on in Ukraine. Fundamentally, Russia is trying to obliterate the Ukrainian nation from the face of the earth. This is and they're quite open about this, right? So I think that, and that realization, I think, has been slow in coming to a lot of people within the United States, not exclusively there, but especially within there, to recognize the scale of what's going on. So the government is not interested in saying we want to have a balance of issues taught and we want to have more conservative voices in campuses. No, they want them gone. And to the extent they're replaced by anything, they'll be replaced by something which is fundamentally an indoctrination, a combination of indoctrination camp and trade school. The thing that strikes me, and the reason I bring the existential sense of rule of law into this, is once you understand and really absorb this sense of, oh, okay, there's nothing I can give them that will satisfy them because the only thing they want is me gone. That is when I think something clicks or something needs to click, because that's the bridge that has to be crossed for people to actually get up, get out of their houses, and go out and make a difference on the streets. And yes, with their elected representatives for sure, but to actually stand up and say, no, I have to take this way more seriously. If there's something that has particularly bothered me about the way many elite American institutions, which includes Congress, includes law firms, includes universities and the media and so forth, and even a lot of people generally, and again, this is not exclusive to the United States, but there's a sense of somebody should fix this. I hope something happens soon. Somebody should do something about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
somebody else. And if you're waiting around for someone else to fix this, I promise you, you will be swept away. So that's honestly, that's the point at which I'm waiting for the tide to turn. If that point does not arrive, the tide will not turn, and the United States, as we knew it, will be well and truly over. I do think it will turn because I have faith in human nature, and I actually have faith in the American spirit. But it's going to be a very tough go. But those are the stakes. And this comes right back to what we talked about at the start. It's like we've got to be upfront about the stakes here so that people understand what they're actually at risk of. Because when they absorb that risk, that should scare the hell out of them. And we need people to have the hell scared out of them right now.
Thank you for saying that, Jordan. That's exactly why I wanted to have this conversation with you and to have this kind of open conversation, because I know that a lot of people out there are thinking this stuff, worried about this stuff. We're messaging each other about these questions and concerns and fears that we have. But I think having an open dialogue about it maybe lets other people know that it's okay to talk about this stuff. In fact, we should feel entitled and we have a right to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
That's exactly the fabric of both of our countries, is to be able to have this kind of free discussion.
Yeah.
And like one thing that's been extremely troubling, beyond all of this has been troubling, but I think it strikes a personal note too, being as a lawyer, that law firms that are intended, law firms, to be advocates of clients and also to stand up for the rule of law, because when we get sworn in fact, the rule of law is one of the things that we're taking an oath to defend, not any particular person, but order for which we're actually licensed, the law.
Yeah.
And so some firms have caved. Some firms have made deals with the administration, which is something that has never happened before. Like an executive taking over doesn't reach out to law firms to ask them to behave in a certain way. Like that's never something that's been done. Like, I don't know, the chilling effect, the fact that it's undermining the principles for which lawyers stand in our oaths, and also the fact of, it brings up the old Shakespeare quote, right? First thing you do is get rid of all the lawyers. And although that's a kind of when lawyers are the butt of a joke for most people, you kind of laugh it off. But the context of that is that it's when a strong arm leader wants to take charge, you want to get rid of the people that are standing for the rule of law, and those are lawyers.
Yeah. And I think it's definitely a major part of the dynamic that we're seeing play out. So a number of things. Number one, you're absolutely right that one of the many problems and obstacles that we're facing in all this is that so many of these things have come out of nowhere. It's like we have no reference point for this. We can't go back and say, when was the last time a president threatened to destroy a law firm unless the law firm gave them free services and wiped out all their equity and inclusion initiatives? Oh, okay. No, this never happened before, because that's insane. And that's part of the problem. That's part of drain on our resources, if you will, on our mental and emotional resources. First, we have to actually grapple with what's going on and get our heads around it and say, oh my God, this is actually happening. And that's the thing. That's the reason why, going back to, not for the last time in this conversation, to World War II analogies, that's why the Blitzkrieg was so successful, because by the time you realize what was happening, it was over. So I think that has been a major part of the problem. When you look at those very large and very rich law firms in the U.S. that have, I think there's 9 of them now that have come to these agreements. And I have been trying over the last few weeks to be more charitable and more understanding of their situation, because it's good for my soul, but it's also good for understanding a little bit better. If you are in charge of one of these firms, whether individually or as a group, then you have a responsibility of stewardship to the firm, right? It's not responsible for you to say, I will fly this law firm into a mountain, right? Because you have a duty, and it's a serious duty. It's not maybe not a professional ethical one, but it is certainly a moral duty to safeguard this business and the livelihoods of the people who work here as much as I can. So I get that. I also get the fact that simply saying things like don't obey in advance is a little bit of saying, all right, why are you blaming the people who were attacked? And I think that's fair as well. The proximate number one cause of all of this is Donald Trump, and he is the root of everything that has happened here. So we have to understand the firms were put in a terrible position. That is me being charitable, and I think it's very true and it's very rational. Doesn't mean that the choices they made weren't wrong. I think they absolutely were. And again, there's two elements of this. The first is there was a piece of the New York Times yesterday that talked about the fact that what the firms think they agreed to and what Trump thinks they agreed to could be very different things. And there's a great deal of uncertainty because no one has actually seen the written agreements. We don't even know if there are written agreements. So we don't know, outside of whatever he's yammered on about at Truth Social, what they've actually promised to do. The firms themselves have been very circumspect about this, hoping it'll maybe all go away. So part of it, yes, you can look at it tactically and say, tactically, maybe you could have managed this better, you should have gotten better terms, or you should have term limited it or time limited it or something like this. And we can have that discussion, but I think that's the less important discussion than what were you thinking in letting the government decide what your firm is going to do and who your firm is going to be? Because fundamentally, those are the questions. Yes, there are significant risks to these firms' business. The commercial finance lawyers are all very happy because they can continue to do their incredibly lucrative work. Litigators, as a rule, less happy about it. Okay, that's fine. But reputationally, I think these are body blows to these firms. I wrote a piece about how I don't think they'll ever recover their brand amongst law students and young lawyers. I think they are toast in that regard. But also the broader question of, if you are willing to cave on this, right, on a threat like this, then it's an indictment of the degree to which you actually hold seriously the values of professional independence, of the rule of law, of the ability. This is not even a lawyer thing. The ability of any independent enterprise to tell the government, when the government says to you, do A, B, and C, to tell the government to go pound sand.
Yeah.
That's so there's that. Had these firms said no, and we've seen some of the firms have said no, and Jenner and Block and Wilmer Hale and Perkins Coie, and they're bringing lawsuits, and they are suffering damages. I'm sure they're losing lawyers, and I'm sure they're hurting. And that's what happens when someone picks a fight with you and you fight back. You're going to hurt. Same thing here in Canada. If we're going to fight back, then we're going to hurt. We're going to bleed out of all this, and we've got to be ready for that. Okay, but when you make a deal like this, what you were saying is that our continued ability to make money, to continue to be in business, is more important to us than our professional independence and our professional dignity. And I just don't see how you come back from that, right? I don't see how anybody ever takes you seriously as an entity again after you make a statement like that. Because here's the thing. If not that Trump would have come after a 5-lawyer firm that was just barely scraping by and said, I'm going to bring the weight of the world on top of you. Okay, if they collapse under all that, I get it, of course, because you're just trying to make ends meet and so forth. These firms have lawyers where the average partner is pulling down $6 million in profit every year. Okay, so yeah, what if you lost half of your profit? What if you lost 80% of your profit? You know what? I think you'd still probably be able to get by and to get through. So I don't know. It's one of those things where, in a microcosm, what's really, again, two things. From the point of view of what Trump is trying to do, he's trying to break the legal profession because, as you say, referencing Jack the Butcher, he knows if you break the legal profession, if you break lawyer spirit, you will have a field day. One of the reasons why he fired all the judge advocates general out of the armed forces as well. Get the lawyers out of the way, And you don't have to kill all the lawyers, you just have to find out what the lawyers actually care about. And we now know what the lawyers or the partners at those firms care about. But the other aspect of it is from the point of view of your own business, of your own sense of self-worth as a professional and as a lawyer. Like, this is a tough job. It's hard to be a lawyer, and it's hard to do this job well, and it can wear you down. Everybody here who practices law knows what it's like to come out at the end of the day just feeling flattened and worn out. It's, oh my God, that was just brutal. But one of the things, honest to God, one of the things that keeps us going is, but we're here doing good work. We're doing important and necessary work. I have said this in front of audiences so often, I'm sure they're sick of me saying it, but I've said, look, a law firm is not a pizza parlor, and it's not a hair salon, and there's nothing wrong with pizza parlors and hair salons, but we're in the business of doing something different that has social ramifications, that has societal implications if we do it right. And when we see examples of firms giving in like that, in fact, lining up, going in together to sign agreements to say collectively, we will all pick up 30 pieces of silver, then you just have to wonder. So final thought on this. Honestly, Paul Weiss, Skadden-Arps, all the rest, I don't want to give them any more attention. The firms I want to give attention to are Sussman Godfrey, Wilmer Hale. God, I won't remember their names, having said I won't remember them. Perkins Coie, and the fourth one will come back to me after I finish talking about this. I'm paying attention to the fighters. I'm paying attention to the ones who actually went out there and stood up for what they believed in, because that's where we should be giving our attention right now.
For me, a lot of this it's brought up this idea of forgetting, because there's so much that we say that seems like empty words that we don't realize the weight of what they mean until moments like this.
Yeah.
Like when you get sworn in, and for me, like many years ago, you're told that you're entering an honorable profession, and it's all well and good. You nod your head and okay, because it's always been that way. It's been so long that way that perhaps those words don't have the weight that they import. But now, like honorable, there's actually a cost to that, to bearing that honor.
Yeah.
It also brings to mind, and I was talking to a friend about this about a week ago, is we were walking and talking about these very things that people have talked about privately and maybe not felt comfortable talking about openly. But the quote from Martin Luther King Jr., where the Reverend was talking about injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Yeah. And I remember hearing that quote and thinking of it as this historical artifact. It was this thing that was a lovely, beautiful, poetic thing to say, as he did say many things that were quite beautiful, but that there was such, it was wrought by danger. It was wrought by peril.
Yeah.
And to feel the sense of that brings those words alive in a way that hasn't been before, and in a better situation, hopefully would never have come up. But again, I think it comes back to that idea of forgetting why we have these things. They've been there for a while, and it takes something to shake us up and to wake us up to understand why we're doing what we're doing.
And we need to. And it has to happen on a regular basis. You talk about forgetting. One of the reasons we've forgotten is that we are 4 full generations away from the last time the world convulsed itself. People say, oh, we'll never forget what happened. Yeah, we will. And we did. And here we are coming back into it again. But that's the thing. Great truths like this, universal truths about the human condition, do need to be relearned on a regular basis, because otherwise they just become nice things that you put in a frame and hang it on the wall. Oh, a quote from Dr. King, how nice. But it's in a situation like this, coming back to your point about cost. I was having a conversation with an American friend of mine, and one of the things I said to her, and I tried not to put it quite as harshly as this, but I think I probably did. I said, look, if you're waiting for your institutions to come to your rescue, I have to tell you they've failed, right? Congress has failed, flat out. No question about it. Maybe it can recover. I don't know. We'll see. Congress has failed. Many of the lower courts in the U.S. have stood up and done good work, but we all think we know what's going to happen when they hit the Supreme Court and what's going to happen up there. That's a separate conversation, which would be interesting to have in terms of speculating about the impact of that. But even I said the Constitution. Okay, from a Canadian point of view, we have been aware of the American Constitution for a long time. And I was a kid, like 8, 9 years old, and I'm sitting down to watch my Saturday morning cartoons when I'm watching Schoolhouse Rock, and I'm Only a Bill on Capitol Hill, and The Shot Heard Around the World, and all this kind of stuff. I learned
Yeah.
more about American history than Canadian history, which I think is, among other things, a problem. But the Constitution has this mythic status. There was a whole series of movies, fundamentally, that this whole sense of all these Nicolas Cage movies about, oh, the Constitution is the key to all this. It's just a piece of paper that was written by a bunch of guys, most of whom owned slaves, by the way, to more than 200 something years ago. And it's not going to save you either, right? These things have to be renewed and fought for again. And I mentioned Constitution because I don't want to make this just about the United States. Today, here in Canada, it's the 40th anniversary of the passage into the proclamation to power, or a proclamation into effect, of Section 15 of our Charter of Rights, which is about equality, the right to equality. And that one, it was delayed for 3 years. Like the Constitution Act was introduced in 82. Section 15 didn't come until 85 because it took them 3 years just to go through and weed out all the awful inequality throughout the country. So our Constitution, in that sense, is quite young. But our day is going to come. Everybody's day comes eventually. And one of the reasons we look at history and we look around the world and so forth is we take heart from other people. Anybody who's feeling like, oh, I don't know if I can do this, go look at Ukraine, right? Ukraine, which was a country that in so many respects was indistinguishable from any number of other countries that any of us would have ever lived in or visited and so forth. And war was brought onto them, and they could have folded the president, that wonderful line of Zelensky, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. That's the spirit, right, that we need. And I think if we've got that, we will start to reinvent and rediscover all this. These are historical currents, and perhaps we are doomed to re-experience them to a certain extent. History doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. But the choice is always ours as to what we're going to do about it, and that's the choice we're in right now.
Yeah, we are. I remember when I was a kid, my dad and mom, they had me a little later in life, and my dad was in the Korean conflict. He ran a barbershop, and he had some barbers that worked with him, and sometimes after school I'd be hanging out at the barbershop until it was time to go home. And some of the barbers that worked with my dad, one of them had fought in World War II. And my dad had a few volumes about the history of World War II, and they had all these pictures in them, and you would see pictures in these books of the concentration camps and blitzkriegs and just all of that history. And I remember talking to this barber about his experience using the Navy and Pearl Harbor and all this stuff. And I think having that personal connection to someone who went through that, lived through that. My father fighting in Korea, my Uncle Pete, was a gunner on a B-52 in World War II. My great grandfather actually fought in World War I.
Oh my gosh.
And so there's been a long and deep connection to fighting for the principles of this country, the dream of this country, the hope of the best of this country, even though like momentarily things have seemed to need improvement. They certainly do now. One other thing that comes to mind is Briga Garcia.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Just to think that there's that lawyer that I mentioned, the immigration lawyer, but there's also this simple man who's a husband and father and special needs child, and just gets lumped into a much larger topic, is that it has to do with due process. Again, hearkening back to the rule of law, that we all deserve our day in court to be able to say our piece, what our view of the facts are, to be able to prove our side, and to have that just wiped away is something that I think everyone should be outraged about.
Yeah, and sometimes I wonder, like, as with the rule of law, whether due process, sorry, Canadian pronunciation, due process also is a term that is just so bland sounding that people don't appreciate what it actually means. What it means is the government can't just take you and put you in jail. You have the right to have them prove that you've done anything wrong. So there is that. But I think this is an important point. So the fact of he's our representative plaintiff at the moment, right? But him and at least 1,200 others, and probably quite a few more that we don't know about yet, whisked off the streets, sent to a Salvadoran prison camp or wherever they have been sent, and done on the merest of bases to have done so. What's really interesting about this, if you want to approach it analytically, is there's no rational basis here. There's no actual threat, actual danger. They're trying to make it out now with lies about how, oh, he's a terrorist, oh, he's a gang member. All of it are lies. Again, we're not accustomed to serial liars in charge of our governments, but that's what you've got right now. So there's a bit of an ex post facto justification, but fundamentally, when you look at the filings that the government has made on this, what they amount to is, we did this because we're the government. And when it comes to national security and foreign affairs, you don't have any right to question what we do. And we define foreign affairs, national security as we like. And not only is that their position, it is delivered with a degree of contempt, with a dismissal, with the "don't bother me, boy." The arrogance is not only infuriating, it's got to be intentional. Right? The courts are being goaded. The courts are being stripped of their dignity. And they're doing all this for the only reason any bully ever does anything, which is I want to see what you're going to do. And it took Trump about 5 minutes to figure out what law firms would do. And they made it easy for him. Happily, so far, the lower courts are not engaged in this. So again, it's just so important to be able to be in a position to say, no, I'm going to push back hard against you on this. But the reason they're doing it on this guy in particular is because they know that there is a significant swath. Again, I'm not picking on the American population. You'll find this in many Western countries. A significant proportion of the population doesn't like immigrants, doesn't trust people with the wrong kind of last name or the wrong colored skin or the wrong kind of accent, and they can be very easily persuaded that, oh, he's probably bad, and if they say he's bad, that's okay. Because it's always easier, as we have known back to World War II, that when they come for someone who's not, you are not going to make a fuss about this, but once they come for that person, they will not stop coming. It's not going to be enough for courts to say, don't do this, right? Because what's going to happen now? So again, the judge in that case said to the government, you bring him back, more or less. And now they've appealed this to one of the circuit courts. So they'll appeal it again. It's going to go to the Supreme Court at some point. And the Supreme Court's going to be in a position, which I'm sure John Roberts does not want to be in, of saying, if we issue an order to the government to tell them to do X, and the government will probably say, we're not going to do it. And that will be the end of constitutional democracy in the United States. Now, being afraid of that outcome doesn't mean that you just acquiesce to it. You've got to fight on this sort of thing. But it all comes back to this idea of understanding what is behind it fundamentally is it's a blitzkrieg of chaos. It's an intentionally contemptuous approach to all the liberal ideas, small liberal ideas upon which the country is based. And fundamentally, it is about seeing how far they can go before they get pushback. And that is not just the courts, that is also Congress. Congress went like that, right? So how far can we push before they give in, before they give up? And that's the question. That's a question everybody in the US has to answer. How far will I be pushed on this?
I think that has happened, though, in terms of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court issued an order, 9-0, ordering the administration to facilitate the return.
Yeah.
And to me, that is striking for a number of reasons. Number one, 9-0. Even Thomas was like, you got to get that guy back. This is wrong. This is unanimous. So, and one thing that I had anticipated like some time ago is that likely the administration would just say, like, yeah, so what? Because when you look at the power, not the principle, but when you look at the power dynamic, what enforcement? Like, what way is there to enforce those words, that order? The executive has the power of the armed forces,
or at least the National Guard, although they've been open to deploying the military domestically as well. But yes, yeah.
So what enforcement is there? I think it's anecdotal that Andrew Jackson said something similar to the Supreme Court. You have your order, go ahead and enforce it. And that's what we're seeing, because it was brought up at one of the White House meetings in the Oval Office about are you going to abide by this? and it's basically a brush off.
Yeah, and it was very interesting watching the whole decision, because you're right, it was 9-0, but it was also facilitate the return of, right? And the reason it was 9-0, I'm certain, is that Thomas and the other dude, the wife's got the horrible flag, Alito. Thank you.
Yeah, Lito. Yeah,
Thomas and Alito would not have signed off on anything stronger,
right.
and maybe more of those of the conservatives. I don't know. It was a lesser. What it was like. You know, I felt like to be reading that. It was like the bartender at a bar, and there's a loud, angry, belligerent, drunk guy on the corner stool, and they go to them and said, "So you think maybe it's time to head home and so forth?" It's that kind of thing. You're trying to be nice and not get the angry bully, drunken bully upset, because then he's going to start breaking things. That's more or less what facilitate what it meant. If
Yeah.
they'd come out with something stronger, maybe we would just gotten to this point sooner, but we're gonna I remember watching a PR professional being interviewed one time. He did crisis PR for celebrities and so forth. And he was asked, like, what's your approach? And he said, I sit down with my client and I say, how is this going to end? And they think about it and they tell me, and I say, let's go there now. So again, this question the Supreme Court has every day, how is this going to end? Because once we get past all the appeals and the this and that and so forth, we know it's going to end. So go there and deal with it now while you can, is what I'm inclined to think about it. Again, easy for me to say in the cheapest seats possible. But pulling the camera back on this, again, important to understand, it's a multi-front assault. It is a multi-front attempt to destabilize the American government, the American way of life in the country in any number of respects, economically and culturally and so forth. And I said early on, I said, Americans, I said, I think if you were to view the situation as a hostile foreign entity has taken over your government, it might help you respond better to what's going on. But understanding what's going on, having a sense of the urgency and the gravity of the situation helps. But the thing is, and I feel we're coming up on time, so I want to end on a positive note. I said, none of this is foreordained. None of this fight is not over. We haven't even begun. Who was the American guy who's a revolutionary? We have not yet begun to fight. It's
Patrick Henry.
yeah, so that's where we are. We know, I think, what the nature of the challenge is that's in front of us. And now when I say us, I'm not just talking about the United States, I'm talking about everybody who's affected by this. My country is very viscerally affected by what's going on, and pretty much everybody else is, right? But we have agency and we have power of our own. There is power in the people. This is something that, again, people like Dr. King understood, that all we have to do is be prepared to take that step, to take on the cost. It is a cost, it is a sacrifice, there's no question about it, but it is something that we are called upon from time to do. Your father and your uncle and your great grandfather, they were called in their time as well. And the nature of what they had to do was they had to go to another country and be shot at. I don't know what we'll be called on to do, but nobody gets to get through life without having one of these, at least one of these challenges placed to them. This is our time. This is when our own challenge is here, and we are up for this. People ask, are you optimistic? And I said, no, but I am determined and I am positive. And those two things together, if you're positive and you're determined, then this is a winnable war. There's no question it's a war. There's no question it's an assault, but from our point of view, it is eminently winnable.
I think that's a fantastic way to end this, Jordan. I mean, it really is. It really is in the balance, like our democracy, about choosing between power or principles. And I believe in us. I believe in what we can build together. Believe in a hopeful, peaceful country where we can have all of the things that we believe that we had as rights and do have as rights.
Mm-hmm.
The things that we're talking about today, they shouldn't be controversial at all. These are the principles and fundamentals of our countries.
And they're not. They're not. I'll close with an Abraham Lincoln quote, but not the usual one. Someone asked him one time, apocryphally anyway, Mr. Lincoln, if you called a dog's tail a leg, how many legs would it have? And he said, 4. Calling it a leg doesn't make it 1. And calling into question these foundational beliefs and ideals that we all share across nations, across borders, across hemispheres, saying that they're worthless doesn't make them worthless. They only become worthless if we shrug and say, oh yeah, you're probably right. No, this is everybody who stands up, everybody who fights back, everybody who makes a statement to say, no, that's not true, that's not right. That's all you have to do. Honestly, like, we are not called upon to take up a rifle and go and shoot. That's not what I'm advocating, and I hope to God it doesn't come to that. But it starts with being able to say, no, not on my watch, not while I'm around. I'm not letting you get away with saying these things and doing these things, and I will try to stop you. That's all, really, all we all got to do.
It's up to us. Let's not forget. Let's keep going, and we can make the world we want to live in.
Rock and roll. Alrighty.
Thank you, George.
Tom. Great conversation, man. Take care.